It's been a wild week for our friend Bob Pockrass of Fox. This NASCAR All-Star race that's going on. I think it's tomorrow night. He's been here in Indy last week, shoveling snow. Bob, thank you so much for finding some time in your busy schedule to join us here on a Tuesday night.
Thanks. Great to be on. And yeah, hopefully NASCAR's Clash runs tomorrow night. Just a few days after it was scheduled. But you know, as you know, there it's certainly a wild weather time, and certainly a lot more snow than what North Carolina's used to getting.
I want to start with this before we dive into racing. You're from Indianapolis, right? Can you tell folks just how you got to where you were and being here in Indy? I think you're a Park Tudor grad, if not mistaken. So I think people forget that you're from here, the Circle City.
Yeah, I moved to Indiana when I was 10, and my introduction to Indiana was when I met some neighborhood kids shortly after I moved in. They said they're going to go to the schoolyard and play ball. And I brought my baseball bat and my glove, thinking we were going to play baseball. And of course, they're all there with basketballs. And so I soon realized I was no longer on the East Coast. I was in Indiana, and I learned quickly about auto racing there. Helped set up the seats for the parade as a Boy Scout there in Indianapolis. Covered races there as early, I want to say, as 1989 as a student at Indiana University. So pretty long history there of following IndyCar and the racing at IMS.
Hey, go Hoosiers. There you
Go
go.
Hoosiers. I'm an Indiana grad. I always joke that my version of the Indiana double is that Tony Stewart chewed out my left butt cheek and Bobby Knight chewed out my right butt cheek. And that's my version of the Indiana double.
Wow. Holy smokes. I bet you're sick of seeing snow, Bob. I mean, what a crazy. I mean, this is one of the most unprecedented things. I can't remember a race. I guess maybe that IndyCar race in Texas maybe 10 years ago that got postponed like 3 months. But have you ever experienced something like this where you've been hurry up and waiting this long for the clash to happen?
Yeah, so I mean, there was a cup race at Michigan over a decade ago that I think got pushed to Tuesday, and part of that was just fog and rain. So you've had that. You've seen snow at Bristol. Seen snow at the old Auto Club Speedway, but never never a kind of a 3-day postponement. But if I didn't want to deal with covering events in the snow, I'd be covering the Pacers, right? Like I'd be covering the NBA, right? It's it's an outdoor sport. I do think that maybe somebody. I mean, if I owned racetracks, I'd probably offer $1 million, maybe $2 million for somebody to create a heated tarp. Might not help this situation, because this is more a situation of people being able to get to the racetrack and teams being able to get to the racetrack. But I do a heated tarp so that once the rain ends, you just roll up that tarp and get to racing.
Bob, you've been on the IndyCar beat, or at least returned to the IndyCar beat in the last couple of years. I would be very curious because of you've seen so much of NASCAR and how they run the show over there and how that operates. What are your observations about IndyCar racing and covering it as a media member?
Well, IndyCar has this very unique thing. After I've been in NASCAR, they have this unique thing called practice, and then they actually work on their cars, and then they practice again, and then they work on their cars, and they qualify, and then they practice again. And so we that certainly is something different than kind of the way NASCAR has gone over the last 4 or 5 years. And it obviously, as a content, somebody who creates content, you like more action on the track, right? So I enjoy that. Look, I think it's just natural that if you see somebody 17 weekends over a 25 to 30 week period, as opposed to seeing somebody every weekend over a 40-week period or 38-week period, I think sometimes it's a little bit less of a grind, right? And so I think that the some of the interactions potentially between the drivers and the media are just a little bit more relaxed. And I think that IndyCar drivers, they mostly have couple of sponsors rather than maybe 5, 6, or 7. And I think that also allows them to be a little bit more free with the way they speak. And finally, I think the one thing I struggle with is understanding tire strategy on the road courses. I'm still learning after a year. I think it's really hard to, you talk to teams and they kind of have an idea, but they don't totally have an idea until the race starts. So it's really difficult to be able to explain what you think is going on. And look, I don't, I think there needs to be a way where you feel like your drivers are going all out all the time and not necessarily trying to save fuel to complement whether you're how many laps you want to go on the softs and the hards.
Bob, a question for you, just covering IndyCar in your first year. I mean, I'm sure you've racked up the frequent flyer miles like crazy. But what's something that you were very surprised to learn in covering IndyCar that was a pleasant surprise? And then what was something that you were like, man, I wish it had gone a different way, or I wish this was different? Is there anything that comes to mind in those two categories?
Yeah, a couple. When I was at Long Beach, who'd I run into but Kyle Larson's parents? And their kids doing the triple header over at Bristol, but they're taking in Long Beach. Of course, they're from California. They have some, I believe they have some family who also either work in the IndyCar IMSA paddock. So they were there. But I just think the massiveness of the event of Long Beach was one that I'd always heard about, but I had never been there. And I think until you're there and kind of experience that weekend is something that is really difficult to prepare for. And then when you talk about disappointing, I guess Iowa would be the disappointment, right? It was just not without the IV investment into concerts and other things there. That weekend was just a little, it was. Would underwhelming be an accurate term?
It was
Yeah,
very underwhelming.
Okay. The racing was good though, right? Like, you had exciting racing. You had, especially with Otto finally, kind of out Josephine Newgarden, right? Like for the first time for when they go 1-2. So I thought that was, compelling. And then I want to say the next day to Polowen, if I remember right. So
yeah.
it was I thought the racing was good, for that track. It just obviously the atmosphere needed to be better.
It was tough walking out of the media center and kind of seeing the grandstands, and you're like, man, I remember a year ago or 2 years ago when, yeah, Gwen Stefani and Tim McGraw were here, but this man, I mean, there would have been a better crowd if they would have ran it down at the world's largest truck stop 30 minutes away.
Well, it's hard because there you have Knoxville, right? And
Yeah.
Knoxville is the place where race fans go, and then they're already probably kind of sort of started to get used to going to a NASCAR Cup race there. And I think just the IndyCar was probably third on your list if you were kind of a local and trying to decide on what to go to.
What are some storylines in 2026 that you're most looking forward in IndyCar? Obviously, Palou goes on a historical run last year. Fox and IndyCar put on a massive number at the Indianapolis 500, as well as ratings being up overall. The competition has been great. But what are some major storylines, whether it's a new track, whether it's a driver chasing something that you're keeping your eyes on when we start 2026 in St. Pete in a few weeks?
Well, I'm going to look at Will Power, right? Everybody's going to be looking at Will Power, and are you going to see a Will Power who thrives on the track, or are you going to see a Will Power who is just, look, we always felt like Penske was a little bit more structured, right? Or a little bit more, you got to be a little bit more proper if you're at Penske. And now with him being at Andretti, is he just going to be unleashed, right? I think that's what we're all kind of, a lot of us are waiting to see. And with Andretti's prowess on the street courses, you talk about the new street course at Arlington, a new street course, Markham replacing Toronto, and then obviously, as you talked about before I came on, the DC street course. and is that going to favor Will Power and Andretti as a whole? So those are things I'll be looking forward to. I'm looking forward to Phoenix, obviously, both Cup and IndyCar there. The week before, St. Pete with trucks and IndyCar. So I think that there's going to be a lot of good, um, a lot of good synergy and and potential for both fan bases to kind of have a reason to look at the other one. And when you talk about that, only two races, I believe, now maybe three, now that you had Washington, um, will actually be running where IndyCar and NASCAR are pretty much running at the same time. Big improvement over last year. And I think, so for fans of just racing, they're not going to have to choose. And I think that's something for us to watch to see how that helps both sides.
Bob, if you'll pardon the pun, I would be hard pressed to find something kind of more monumental than the announcement of the Washington D.C. race. So, I mean, you've been around longer than Tony or I have. I mean, can you kind of put into perspective how kind of crazy that this is to actually be happening? The fact that this has gotten seemingly across the finish line, that we're going to race in Washington D.C. within 6 months. This is amazing.
I mean, like you probably say, what's the other thing that made you scratch your head and wonder how they're going to do it? And you'd probably go back to the split, right? I
Right.
mean, when you talk about like, oh my gosh, how are they going to do it? And it's a big challenge. But obviously, when you have, full support of the governments, not you also have DC, the city of Washington D.C. there. So I just think the challenge for IndyCar is to have a safe circuit and a circuit where you can pass, right? You don't want it to be doesn't need to be the best circuit, but you also don't want it to just be a parade. So to me, that's the big challenge for IndyCar, and obviously not a lot of time to get that done. And as you said earlier, it's one, at least in that specific area, it's going to be a one race kind of deal. So you got to get it you got to get it right at the first time. But what a way for people, it's certainly going to get attention, just like NASCAR's Chicago Street Race did. It's certainly going to potentially attract new eyeballs to the sport. People who maybe wouldn't go to a race otherwise will be able to go to this race. And so, you hope that that exposure will create some new fans, or maybe at the very least, if people are then in another city where an IndyCar race is, maybe they just would go check it out out of curiosity again.
Yeah, and I think obviously with the 250th
Mm.
celebration, but think about what Fox has leading up to that race. You've got the MLB All Star Game, which is always, I guess, it signifies summer. You've got the World Cup, where everybody is going to be behind Team USA, and you hope that that kind of carries over to, hey, there's this patriotic race in the nation's capital that's going to have drivers from all over the world competing on a grand stage. Look, I know there's a lot of cast and characters, especially in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Media Center. What was that Indianapolis 500 for you last year? What was that like? It was obviously, yeah, it was obviously busy. There was so much going on, added with the Kyle Larson situation. But what was your Indianapolis 500 like, and what are you looking forward to the most about coming back to Indianapolis in the month of May?
Yeah, it was my first Indy 500 since Danica's last race was
Mhm.
at 2018. I
Yep.
can't remember exactly, but so that had been the last Indy 500 I had been to, and obviously it's always a spectacle. And I think you'll remember covering Kyle Larson, and all of a sudden this rain shower that like you really didn't expect, right? And then all
Right.
of a sudden you're going back into this. Oh my gosh, is he going to be able to race? Is he not? And Tony Kanaan, is he gonna have to race this race? And then you have Scotty Mack's wreck right there before the race, even starts. And so it was just a really kind of a strange start. And then of course the finish with Pillow getting that first big oval win. So to me, like, look, I'd been to I think my first Indy was around 1980 or 81 as a kid, going to the grandstand. So I kind of knew knew the just how big a deal it was. You just can't, as anything that has 100 years of history, and as I tell people, like, you just have generations of families sitting
Mhm.
next to, sitting with each other in the same seats they've had for, you know, potentially 50 years or more. And, and so when they play, you learn the words to Back Home Again in Indiana in choir in in the fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. So when they sing that, it's not just a song, right? It's something that is kind of instilled in you and kind of brings you back to your youth. And so when you hear that, even, I mean, I've heard it plenty of times, watched it on TV plenty of times, but when you're in the venue and you hear it, it certainly is kind of it's just an emotional experience.
Do you have a favorite Indy 500?
Oh, I don't. I would say, I mean, I was there when Willie T. Ribbs qualified for the Indy 500, and that might have been kind of one of the most, you know, mm, kind of most memorable, some of the most memorable moments. I was there. Want to say when Penske didn't qualify, and that was, a wild scene as well. But I can't say I have a favorite Indy 500.
Well, those are two amazing moments. So I'm certainly jealous that you got to see those for sure.
It just means I'm old, David.
Um, on the Penske subject, kind of a roller coaster year in 2025 for Team Penske. Will Power, as we've already talked about, goes to Andretti. David Malukas comes over to the 12 car. Joseph Newgarden wins the last race of the season. Scotty McLaughlin, obviously, as you mentioned, had that heartbreak at the Indianapolis 500. Your expectations on a bounce back season for Team Penske, and we have Joseph Newgarden heading into free agency, possibly, with being a free agent at the end of the year, and obviously the biggest domino to fall. So, how do you expect to see Team Penske run this season?
Well, let me first qualify it by, if you asked me something about Team Penske last week and if I expected Tim Cindric to be
Yeah,
back
yeah, yeah.
in a strategist role, I would not have predicted that. So potentially there are things that we won't expect, right?
Yeah.
But I think I Joseph, when you ask him, like, hey, so does this mean the whole start of the year is more important? And it's like, well, every start of the year is important. This one maybe not, you know, not any different, but you've got to think that if things go well at the start of the year, he would feel better about signing an extension. You got to know that if you're another team, you want to take a look at Joseph Newgarden just because of how strong he is. But you also say, well, where is he in his career? How good of a teammate is he going to be? Where can he help your program? And so, yeah, I don't know. That's just about, like, whether you feel like he can uh, he can win in your program. I get the feeling they're going to bounce back, just because rarely do you see Penske fall into a rut that far. And I think just last year, with all the change in the middle of the year, that's a lot to kind of overcome and kind of find your way. And I think, this offseason, that they did give Joseph some time to just kind of take a break and not be involved in a whole lot. And I think everybody now, with this kind of reset and refresh, it should be good for them. And as we talked about, you talk about four new venues right now, so that should somewhat even up the playing field. Should, right? Because not a lot of people have notes. Everybody's going to have tested at Phoenix. Nobody's probably going to even have a them of Washington, right?
Yeah.
When are they going to have even any time to scan it and do that? So I think those type of things should play into the favor of Penske, I would think, because of their depth and the quality of people they have there.
Yeah, and I think too, we went into May last year and we learned that Scotty McLaughlin had re-signed, and we were like, okay, well, we haven't heard anything on Will Power. and then that kind of continued to string along throughout the month of May, and then the rest of the season before he ultimately went to Andretti. David, you have a question? Go ahead.
No, I just I guess the last thing I would be curious about, Bob, before we get going is, you know what, I never really hear predictions from you, so I want to hear a prediction. Championship, Rookie of the Year, and Indy 500. Go.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Let me start with Rookie of the Year. I am going to go with. Let's see. I'm going to go with Hauger. He just seemed so good in the Indy next, and I think that effort will have a lot of Andretti strength behind his car. So I would go. I'll go with him. Although I'm really interested in seeing what Mick Schumacher does. Indy 500. I am right now going to say.
It's tough. It's so
It-
tough.
It's tough. I'll go with the feel good story of Pato in the Indy
Yep.
500, and then for the championship, I will I will go with Scott Dixon. How
Ooh,
about
Ooh.
that? How about
ooh.
that? Because you got, and this is the way I'm thinking. I'm thinking again. You're talking about new racetracks, somebody who can potentially adapt to them quickly. Somebody who I got the feel. You talked to him last year, he's like, I don't even know how I finished this high in points,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And I get the feeling that he's tired of getting beat by Alex. Plus, he's now knighted, right? So,
Yep.
so what does that? How could that help you? Now, if I come up with some different picks in about 3 weeks, that just means I thought about it more before being asked. I still got a lot of. I got a lot. I'm gonna admit, I have all my NASCAR picks like going through my head right now because I got to make those before the Daytona 500 next week. So I hadn't really gotten to my IndyCar picks just yet.
No,
Well, I
I,
think
I I
I
wanted
think
to put
the
you on the spot. It's always fun to
It's
do
all right. No, it's
that.
awesome. It's
I
awesome. I
think
mean, Pato. I mean, after the commercial of having his heart ripped out, and he seemed to be a little. Did you guys think he was a little salty about that?
yeah.
When
Yeah.
he answered my question, I'm not sure, but I kind of felt that way. Like, why they have to pick on me? He thought it said something pretty much like, he didn't expect him to show up in Joseph's commercial, right?
Yeah.
He thought that commercial was going to be all about Joseph. So, and I just, that pick might be a little bit more from the heart than
Yeah.
from the. But I think the Chevys are going to be, you know, yeah, they'll be strong there this year. I have that feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough. It seems like race week you could probably narrow it down to 7 to 10 drivers. Obviously, the hardest pick is the Daytona 500 because that's just whoever doesn't get crashed, right?
but
So
but I mean, you look at the Indy 500, and I mean, where do you pick Ryan Hunter-Ray,
yeah,
right? I mean, like you talk about how he nearly pulled off the upset last year with a car that they pulled out of the shop, right? That was a show car, and now he's going to have really solid, uh, you know, equipment at one of the top teams in the series.
give me a David's mentioned this. We're kind of due for maybe an upset, dark horse, underdog type of winner in the Indianapolis 500. So give us a dark horse, somebody who has an opportunity to win it, but maybe flying a little bit under the radar as we hit 2026.
Mm, that's a good question. I would say Lungard. You
That's
know
exactly who
that that that
I'm
that
with
that,
you.
that you kind of want to say Santino,
Yep.
right? But I mean, I think when you think of people who don't necessarily, you might not be first in mind when you think of Indianapolis, I'd say Christian Lungard.
Yeah, he kind of outdrove his equipment with Ray Hall while he was there. Obviously, a really good run last year, all season long with McLaren. But I think Lungard is an excellent choice. Santino as well. Bob, thank you so much for finding some time in your busy week. I know it's been chaotic. You've been out shoveling. You've been traveling the country back and forth. I think you were supposed to be in Indy today, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken, but
yeah.
you're still on the East Coast. So Hope everybody is warm and safe. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you here over the next couple of weeks, and I look forward, as the entire chat does. It's blowing up right now. Kyle and David, I can speak for, to having you on again here in the very near future on Unverified.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Bob.